Okay, good morning.
Good morning.
Lovely to see you
On
on
Monday.
this fine, bright Monday morning. I'm so excited to be talking to you today. And just to kind of put a little bit of context, the reason that I'm so excited to talk to you today is because you are a very passionate advocate of inclusion. We spend a fair amount of time on Twitter having conversations with a whole range of other people who are really exciting to talk to. And you've also got a little bit of an interesting story about your relationship with the media, which I'm sure we'll get on to later on. But you see, this is because this is live, you see. So this is what happens when you manage to get hold of a head teacher and they're actually at school. So
it's not me that they want, so it's all right.
So I'm going to hand it straight over to you, really. I mean, how have our paths crossed on Twitter? Tell us a bit about what you do, what you're passionate about, and how we've ended up connected to each other in some way.
So I'm Rachel Tomlinson from Barrowford Primary School, which is in East Lancashire. You'll probably be able to get that from the accent. Our school is very much concerned with the whole child and meeting the needs of the whole child. And when I talk about what we do, I talk about Maslow's hierarchy. So we start at the very base of Maslow and work our way up, really. And we have lots and lots of children who need us to start right at the very base of Maslow and meet those really physical basic needs first, but then very, very soon their emotional mental health needs appear and emerge on top of that. So we have a whole team dedicated, really. Well, the whole team is dedicated to that, but there's kind of a sub-team within the bigger team to address specific needs. So I think it's because, so our connection on Twitter is because I believe very passionately that schools should meet the emotional and mental health needs of the children and the families, wider than the children, but the families that we have in our care, because it is a caring profession and it should be.
So that's fantastic, and that leads me really neatly into a kind of question, because I guess there are lots of people watching this who would make that assumption that part of learning is about feeling safe and that your mental health is in a good place and that your well-being is a focus, especially as a child when you're in school so much. But by the very definition of the fact that you have to state that, that kind of leads us onto a situation where that isn't actually how all educationalists view education, and perhaps would it be fair to say that there are some schools, we have a growing uncomfortable language that tells me that there are schools that don't see things like that. And by uncomfortable language, I suppose I would say things like the conversations we've had a lot around isolation booths, behaviourist approaches to behaviour, and exclusion rises, off-rolling, a whole range of things that keep children's mental health and well-being not as a focus. Would you say that's your experience? Or
yeah, and I think so our schools philosophy, when we don't exclude, we don't sanction at all, actually. So our ethos and our philosophy is no punishments, no rewards. And we have had some experience of the media interpretation of what that might look like in our school. It actually looks very different. It just looks like good parenting. But I think we get lots of children who attend our school who've been at risk of exclusion, either fixed term or permanent exclusion, and who've had a very different experience to school and come with exacerbated trauma. I don't think the trauma has necessarily been caused by the school, but I think certainly it's not been helped by the school system. And in that, I'm not blaming any individual people. I don't think I'm blaming the system. I think the system is, I think school leaders really feel the pressure of accountability and really feel the pressure sometimes from parents about the perceptions of what behaviour management looks like as quite a traditional quite a traditional thing, really. And if people suggested that they parent like that, there would be an outrage. But schools are expected to manage behaviour in a certain way. For in my experience, most children don't need the behaviour managing, because most children manage the behaviour perfectly well themselves. So my experience and my kind of my viewpoint is, we've got all these structures and systems in place for a really small percentage of our pupil population, for whom actually it's really damaging. So the systems that we've created for this very small population actually damage them further. So for me, it was, and for us here, it was just about rethinking those systems, about how we could develop systems and things in place that would support those children in terms of managing their own behaviour. And ultimately that came down to relationships. So I think the wider context is that school leaders want the best for their children, because nobody comes into this job to harm anybody. You know, that's fair to say. But I think we run away, the system runs away of accountability, and use that system of accountability as almost a protection, because sometimes we don't know what else to do. Because sometimes it's difficult, isn't it, to manage people who've suffered trauma, and it's difficult to have that in a context of a school. So it's kind of easy to push that away sometimes.
Oh, you said so many things there. I mean,
sorry.
No, it's fantastic. We're very much singing from the same hymn sheet in that regard. And, your focus on relationships, and I mean, I want to come back to, and I like what you said, that most children, will manage their behaviour, if not all children can manage their behaviour, if they're in the right environment. And I think that's the key that you're kind of talking to. But the thing that I think people will have heard when they're watching you, which I think is worth unpicking, is when you said we have no exclusion, we have no sanctions. And I think that's what the media picked up on as well, wasn't it? So do you want to just expand upon that and how you embedded that into your behaviour policy, what kind of journey you went on to get to that place?
So, well, first of all, we have a relationships management policy. We don't have a behaviour management policy. The principles here, the principles here is that we don't manage anybody else's behaviour, because it's impossible. The only person who can manage your behaviour is you. And it's false to suggest to children that anybody else is in their behaviour. So we have a relationships management policy which talks about managing the relationships with the children, and talks about the provisions that we will put into place for all of our children. So we know from attachment theory that relationship is king, and so we're trying to. So here we try and provide a secure base, a safe place for all of our children. And one of the things that we're quite fond of saying is that for the least fortunate children, school should be what home is for the most fortunate. So that's kind of the principle that we're working on for our kids. So that's
okay. Can I stop you? Can I stop you for a moment? Can you say that sentence again, please? Because we like that.
So school for the least fortunate children, school should be what home is for the most fortunate children.
Lovely, thank you. Carry on.
So that's kind of underpins the whole of the ethos, really, and the whole of the philosophy. It's about providing that safe person and that safe place. So once we kind of came to that conclusion, it seemed really rational. It was a really rational next step to kind of go, well, if we exclude our kids, and by exclude I don't mean fixed term exclusions or permanent exclusions, I mean exclude in any sense, really, from the classroom, from a group, from a conversation, from that, actually that doesn't match the attachment aware stuff that we'd spent a lot of time thinking about. So we really needed to look at how we could support our children into making right choices about their relationships in a way that wasn't punitive. So we trained all of our staff and continue to train all of our staff on an ongoing rolling process in restorative approaches. So in terms of our behaviour, traditional behaviour management, people would say our behaviour management is through restorative approaches. I would argue that it's not about behaviour management, it's about having highlighting the importance of relationships for children, because of course those of you who know about restorative practices know that it's all about restoring your relationship to a comfortable place after harming it. So when children have caused harm, or when adults for that matter, because they do have caused harm, then we engage in a restorative process after that every time. So every incident, every time, there is a restorative process. So there's no sanctions, so there's no pointless punishment, and I'm saying pointless punishment in inverted commas. I'm talking about punishments that kind of are just punishments that don't bear any relationship to what's gone before. So, and often punishment is that. It's just a punishment. It doesn't kind of, children can't rationalise the link between the incident and the punishment. So we have a restorative approach. We engage in, it's quite a traditional, the 5 questions. We ask the same 5 questions, and it happens every time without fail. Sometimes it happens to kids in the playground, have conflict, and they get over it and they sort it very quickly themselves because they know that that's how we do it here. And then on other occasions, we might get, a whole host of people involved, and it might take us a week to prepare it, and to calm down enough to, for the people involved to calm down enough to take part in it. And that might be parents, it might be parents of other children, it might be other members of staff. On occasion we've had the manager for booths down the road, because there was an incident involving the supermarket, and and those things are really quite powerful, and everything in between. So really immediate, really fast, to really kind of quite delayed but involving a lot of people, and anything in between really. So it's in response to the conflict. And then so we talk about no punishments, but there are consequences, because in life there are consequences. So if you've made a mess, you tidy it up. If you've hurt somebody's feelings, you apologise. But the rational, and they're linked, and they come from the child. So the child's in charge and in control of how they fix their relationship with the person that they've harmed. And usually it's a two-way street, isn't it? As we know, you can't have conflict with somebody who's not having conflict back. So usually it's a two-way street, and usually it's, and for us, 90%, we're a primary school, so 90%, more than 90% of the time, it finishes with an apology, and a handshake, or a hug, or a high five, or whatever it is that those children feel comfortable with. Sometimes it's bigger, and our children, what the process does is, and there's a lot of hierarchy in this in terms of learning. So we do a lot about emotional literacy, especially with our most vulnerable children, the ones who show us the most challenging behaviours. We do a lot about emotional literacy, so they can name how they're feeling, they can talk about what's been going on for them. And so they can kind of rationalise through language what's been happening. So, for those children, sometimes they will say, outside's just too big and too out of control for me, and I can't manage it. So I really need a place when it's playtime to be safe, because then I can manage my emotions better, and then nobody gets hurt. So we kind of provide that as standard now. So it's big, so there's an evolving process as well in all of this. So now all of our classes provide an option at playtime, because we're really aware that for some children, outside is a really scary place. So there is a choice to stay in too, which is not punitive at all. So they play in or they play out, and sometimes, at the end of a restorative process, it might be that a child will say, I think I need to not play out for the next few weeks. Will you please remind me? Because I'll forget.
Yeah, sorry. There's so many kind of values that are taught within that setting, aren't there? I mean, you've got compassion, connection, repair, relationships, responsibility.
I'm just going to move the camera around, Lisa, and I'm just going to show you our rounded and grounded poster that's on the wall. I'm in our assistant head Laura's office here, and so she, the wall, I don't know if you can see. Can you just see the hearts? I'll walk over to it a little bit.
Very lovely.
So these are our values.
I'm losing you in terms of your
Are they backwards? Oh, I'll go back.
Come back over.
Am I back?
And when maybe
Hi, am I back?
in some way to the 5 questions, you said there were 5 questions. Are those on the wall linked to that?
No, they're not on the. They don't tend to be on the walls, but we do have them in the back of all of our lanyards. So all the staff have them in the back of our lanyards. I'll just show you mine. So they're all there. So it's kind of, you know, it just happens. It's just practice. So children will take those and say, "Can I just read them? Can we just use them?" So yeah. So that's kind of how it happens. So there's consequences that are appropriate, that match what's happened, that are about repair, really.
What would you say? What would you say to a school that's watching this, who, because one of the things, so I've trained in quite a lot of schools, looking particularly around trauma and building better organisational resilience and working in that way. And one of the things that comes up a lot is where I might have teachers saying to me, "I really want to do this, I love this really resonates with me," but they're going into a school where it's just not happening, it's not part of the senior leadership, or vice versa. I've got a senior leadership team going, "We really want to put this in the school, but you know, there's all this other stuff going on with staff." I mean, so it's not really as, or I do a lot of work with designated teachers. So I speak to them, and then they're going off into their respective schools, and you know, they're just like, you know, how do I embed this into my school? How do I get my school to understand the value of this and go on this journey? I mean, what would you say to those teachers or those heads? Or
I think that it has to be from the leadership. I think in a school as a teacher, unless it's from the leadership team, you're going to really struggle. If there are systems around you, if there is a very systematized discipline, for one system, then it's going to be really difficult. But I think for individual teachers who have really great relationships with their kids, actually they're never going to use the discipline system, because they'll never use it. They'll never need to use it, because the kids will respond. So that's kind of my message for teachers, you know, just about forming really great relationships with your children, because if you do, then the children will respond to that. So kind of that's the first thing. In terms of the leadership, I think for us, so we've now been had this approach. We've had a relationships policy for I think about 9 years. So we've been punishment free, completely punishment free for about 9 years. So it's not a fly by night fad. It's fairly embedded in our staff. But the process to get to that point 9 years ago was, you know, perhaps it took us perhaps 2 or 3 years to get there initially. Working with the staff whose hearts and minds were very easy to bring into that. I think so that it's very much a hearts and minds approach, isn't it? Hearts first. So we would, I think, and I'm going to say the word lucky, although I don't think it was luck, but we were lucky that we had a staff team that really embraced that approach. And then obviously as staff move on and you know, you recruit people who are going to buy into that approach. So I suppose it becomes easier once it's embedded with your kind of core team. You know, and it is tricky. We do get it wrong still. We have staff who get it wrong, but they sit down and they have a restorative process and they restore the harm that they've done or the harm that they've caused. And it's all about being kind to each other, really, and forgiveness as well. So the message I would give, and I do give to teachers, is it's about relationships, and you can only control what you can control in your classroom, and you can control how your relationships are with those children. You can control how kind you are to the children that are in your direct care. For leaders, it's about buying in hearts and minds, and it's about proving why this process is better, because it's harder. It's so much harder. It takes so much more time, and emotionally it's really difficult.
Oh,